does a royal princess, once the pride of Korea, end up forgotten and abandoned by the very people meant to protect her? Princess Deokhye, the last princess of Korea, was born into royalty but lived a life of tragedy, heartbreak, and isolation. Her story is one of the most heartbreaking tales of betrayal by her country, her captors, and history itself. Stripped of her identity and dignity, she was left to languish in obscurity, a princess only in name, erased from the hearts and minds of the people she was born to serve. How did all that happen? Watch the full video to find out. But before we get into the video, please like and subscribe to this channel and let us know in the comments the kind of content you'd like to see from us. Let's get into the video. Before we go on, let's have a quick history lesson. In the early 1900s, Korea faced one of the hardest and most heartbreaking times in its history. In 1910, Japan took over the country, and with that, Korea lost its freedom. The royal family, once respected and powerful, was left with no real authority. They were forced to stand by, unable to protect their people or their land. Japan's goal wasn't just to rule over Korea, it was to wipe away everything that made Korea unique. They wanted to erase its culture, its history, and even its identity. The royal family, once symbols of Korean pride, became nothing more than tools in Japan's plan. One of the people most affected by this was Princess Deokhye. She should have grown up in palaces, surrounded by the love and admiration of her people. Instead, at just 13 years old, she was taken from her home and sent to Japan. She never got the chance to truly experience the land she was born to lead. What should have been her right, her heritage, and pride as a princess was taken from her. Once in Japan, Princess Deokhye was thrown into a life that was completely foreign to her. She was forced to follow the strict rules of Japanese royalty, far from the warmth of her family, the sound of her native language, and the traditions of her homeland. Imagine a young girl alone in a strange place with no familiar faces to comfort her and no one to speak her language. Instead of love or care, she was met with cold expectations to blend into a society that wanted to erase everything about her. For the Japanese Empire, Deokhye was a trophy, a living symbol of Korea's defeat. But for her, it was a nightmare, one where she lost her voice, her identity, and her very sense of self. The Japanese royal family didn't see her as a person. They saw her as an object, a reminder of their control over Korea. They even took away her Korean name, forcing her to take on a Japanese one, stripping her of the last part of her identity. Now, this wasn't just about politics. It was personal. Every day, another piece of who she was slipped away, leaving her feeling like a stranger, even to herself. Each day that passed, she lost a bit more of the girl she used to be. Far from her homeland and the family who once gave her a sense of belonging, the loneliness and isolation began to take a heavy toll on Princess Deokhye. What started as emotional suffering soon turned into deep mental torture. The princess battled severe mental health issues that only grew worse with time. I mean, you can't blame her. Deokhye had been torn away from everything she knew and left in a foreign land, unwanted and forgotten. The pain of being abandoned, first by her people and then by the very ones who held her captive, was too much for anyone to bear. Her mind, just like her spirit, was slowly breaking under the weight of years of silent suffering. As if her fate wasn't cruel enough, the Japanese royal court made matters even worse with an arranged marriage. They chose Count Takeyuki as her husband. But this wasn't a marriage based on any form of love or companionship. It was another form of control. For Deokhye, this marriage was just another chain, another way to keep her bound to the nation that had stripped her of her identity. As you'd expect, the marriage was cold and distant, lacking the very warmth she so desperately needed. There was no escape from the constant feeling of abandonment. Even in her closest personal connection, she was met with emptiness. Her marriage, like so many parts of her life, became just another chapter in the tragic story of a princess who had been denied every chance at happiness. World War II reshaped the world, shifting borders and lives, but for Princess Deokhye, it only deepened the sorrow that had already engulfed her life. Japan, which had forcibly taken her from her homeland as a child, was defeated, and its royal family, once powerful, was left with nothing. Deokhye tied to Japan through an arranged marriage, found herself in limbo. With the abolition of Japan's nobility, her husband lost his title, and the structure that had once held her life together began to crumble. Divorce followed soon after in 1953, leaving her without a purpose. Meanwhile, Korea, newly freed from Japan's rule, had changed beyond recognition. The country that Deokhye longed to return to had moved on without her. The monarchy that was once a symbol of hope and pride for the nation was now seen as a part of a distant past that everyone wanted to forget. Deokhye, once a princess, was now a forgotten figure in both countries, caught between two worlds. Neither Japan nor Korea had any place for her. She had become a woman without a home. Her royal blood, which should have shielded her from hardship, instead felt like a curse. Korea, in its struggle to rebuild, had little concern for the last remnants of its royal family. The royal lineage was no longer of importance to the people who were focused on the nation's recovery. In Japan, she was discarded, a mere reminder of an old victory in the war. With Japan's defeat, her ties to the imperial system were cut off, and she was cast aside, no longer needed or wanted. The pain didn't end there. In 1956, just 3 years after her divorce, Deokhye experienced the most devastating blow of her life, the loss of her only daughter, Mase, who disappeared and was believed to have committed suicide. This heartbreaking tragedy shattered Deokhye's already fragile mental state, sending her further into isolation and deepened her battle with schizophrenia, a condition she had struggled with since her youth. The grief of losing Mase consumed her, and she spent years in and out of mental hospitals as her health deteriorated. By the time she was finally allowed to return to Korea in 1962, she was no longer the bright, hopeful princess she had once been. Her return was not a joyful homecoming, but rather the arrival of a broken woman haunted by years of loss and betrayal. The Korea she had dreamed of coming back to was no longer the same, and neither was she. The end of World War II did not bring her the hope of a new beginning. It only confirmed the painful truth. The future she had been promised had been stolen from her long ago, leaving behind the shattered pieces of a forgotten princess. Korea had moved on without her. The country she had left as a young girl was gone, replaced by a nation transformed by war, divided by borders, and caught in the rush of modernization. The royal family, once revered, was now a memory from a distant, painful past. Her return was not a cause for celebration. It was a reminder of everything she had lost. For years, she had wanted to return to the land of her birth, but when she finally set foot on Korean soil, it brought no comfort. Her mind, damaged by years of loneliness and illness, could no longer fully understand the weight of the moment. To the people of Korea, she was no longer a princess. They saw her as a sad reminder of a history that everyone wanted to forget. Upon her arrival, she was greeted as an ordinary citizen rather than the princess she once was. Though some of her former court ladies bowed to her in respect, it was an emotional, yet bittersweet reminder of what had been lost. In her final years, Deokhye lived quietly, far from the palaces and the limelight. In Korea, Deokhye spent her final days living in Changdeok Palace, though it was a shadow of its former self, much like her life. Despite some peaceful moments, her health continued to deteriorate. She passed away in 1989 at the age of 76, her death marking the end of Korea's royal bloodline. She died in obscurity, the last link to a royal line that had once commanded the respect of an entire nation. The story of Princess Deokhye is not just the tale of a royal figure lost to history. It is a human story of heartbreak, isolation, and abandonment. From the moment she was taken from Korea as a child, her fate was sealed by forces beyond her control. She lived a life devoid of the love and belonging that could have been her birthright, enduring emotional and psychological torment that few could imagine. Her life was not a fairy tale. It was a tragedy. And that brings us to the end of this tragic tale. It is truly a heartbreaking story. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel for more amazing tales like this. See you next time!